Hello class. Today we're going to look at dividing mixed numbers. Okay, so I got a couple questions to start this video off with. It says, how do you change a mixed number to an improper fraction? Well, hopefully you remember that we use something called the popcorn method. So if I gave you something like 4 2/3 and I wanted you to change this into an improper fraction, I would take my denominator, multiply by the whole number, add the numerator, and put it back over the denominator. So it looks like a thing of popcorn here. So 3 times 4 is 12. Add the 2, 13, 14. We write the 14 down and we put it back over the 3. Okay? So along with this, how would I change a whole number into a fraction? So if I had 4, what's that going to be as a fraction? All you have to do is put it over 1. So 4 over 1 is how we change a whole number into a fraction. So what we're looking at today is division. Okay, so when we talked about multiplication the other day, we had a little rap that helped us to remember what to do. And it sounds something like this. To multiply fractions, you know you got them. It's top times top and bottom times bottom. Well, this first line, to multiply fractions, is a conditional statement. You must have fractions in order for us to multiply. Well, today, there is a prerequisite skill that we need, and that is to know something about a reciprocal. So my question is, what is a reciprocal? And this is a nice website that you can go to get some information about a reciprocal. But a reciprocal is 1 over the number. Okay, so take for example, if I gave you 5, then I need to, 1, change 5 into a fraction. So that would be 5 over 1. So then the reciprocal would be this thing flipped. Reciprocal is the same thing almost as an inverse. Okay, so we're going to invert 5 over 1 to make it 1 over 5. So the reciprocal of 5 over 1 is 1 over 5. So a reciprocal is, you take the number, whatever the number is, and you put 1 on top of it. Okay, so we've got our 5. It's equivalent to 5 over 1. We flip it to 1 over 5. So what we need to know about a reciprocal is that if I were to take the number itself, this number right here, and its reciprocal, and I were to multiply those together, I would always get a value of 1. Okay, so let's see if we can do a couple reciprocals. So what if I gave you the problem 3/4? Okay, so I've got 3/4 here, and I need to write the reciprocal of that. Well, to do a reciprocal, we're just going to take the 3 and the 4, and they're going to flip-flop. So its reciprocal then would be 4 over 3. But because this is an improper fraction, we do need to simplify it down. So it simplifies to 1 1/3. How many 3's in 4? 1. How many's left over when I pull the 3 out? 1 over 3. Okay, so the reciprocal of 3/4 is 1 1/3. Well, what if I gave you a mixed number? Well, the first thing we need to do for a mixed number is actually change it into a fraction. So in order to be able to flip it, I have to have a fraction. So we have to do the popcorn method to change this into a fraction. 5 times 4 is 20, plus 2 is 22 over 5. So the reciprocal of 22 over 5 is 5 over 22. Now, what if it's a whole number? Well, 7 is going to be 7 over 1. So then the reciprocal of 7 over 1 is 1 over 7. This is a key concept that we need for division. Okay, so let's copy down the division rap then. This is what we're going to think about whenever we're dividing. And here's how it goes. To divide fractions, don't ask why, just flip the second and multiply. Now you'll notice in this first one, it says we have to have fractions. We still have to have fractions. So if we have a mixed number, we're going to have to change it to a fraction. If we have a whole number, we're going to have to change it to a fraction. If we already have a fraction, we just say thank goodness and go on. Okay, don't ask why, because sometimes the explanation can be quite confusing. Okay, so I'm not going to take the time right now in this video to explain why. Then it says just flip the second, and that's referring to the second fraction. Well, if we're flipping the second fraction, that is that reciprocal idea. Okay, so reciprocal. Okay, so when we're flipping the second fraction, we're actually finding its reciprocal, and then we're going to multiply. Because our rule for division is going to be multiply by the reciprocal. So let's do the whole rap now. Okay, the rap that we learned today and the rap that we learned last time about multiplying. Here's how it goes. To divide fractions, don't ask why, just flip the second and multiply. To multiply fractions, you know you got them. It's top times top and bottom times bottom. So, and you'll notice in both of these, you have to have fractions. You have to have fractions. That's the key. So let's work a few questions and then we'll be done. So here's our first one. Okay, so we've got a division problem. Okay, and they're both fractions, so we're lucky there. So this first one, okay, so we're going to divide fractions. I know I got them. To divide fractions, don't ask why. Flip the second. So this one right here, the 4 over 7, we're going to turn it into 7 over 4, and we're going to multiply. Now, one of the things that you learned last year was KCF, which stood for keep, change, and flip. So keep the first number the same, change division to multiplication, and flip the second fraction. Okay, so now once we have done that, we now multiply. So to multiply fractions, I know I got them. It's top times top and bottom times bottom. And then, of course, the last step that we must do is simplify. How many times will 32 go into 35? One time. Now, I take this 32 out of the 35, and I have 3 left. And what size piece are they? 32s. Okay, let's try another one. Okay, so now this problem, it's got mixed numbers. Okay, so the first thing I got to do with both of these is change them into fractions. So this first one, I'm going to do 3 times 5 is 15, plus 1 is 16 over 3. And that first fraction I leave alone. Now I know this one, 3 1/5, I'm going to change it to a fraction and flip it. So here's what I like to do to kind of help me remember that I need to flip it. 5 times 3 is 15, plus 1 is 16. I like right above the problem, I write this mixed number as an improper fraction. So it's going to be 16 over 5. So when I move this number here, 16 over 5, down into the problem, I know I have to flip it. So it becomes 5 over 16. And now we multiply. So now I made sure that I flipped it. They're both fractions. So now to multiply, it's top times top, bottom times bottom. But one of the things I talked about in the last video on multiplying and showed you in class is that you can simplify the problem first before you multiply. Because this 16 times 5, that's going to be a pretty good sized number. Okay, this 3 times 16, that's going to be a pretty good sized number. Okay, there might be a way that we could simplify that down. Matter of fact, a number on top and a number on bottom, if they have any common factors, then I can divide by those in the problem. So this 16 and this 16, they have a 16 in common. So I can divide this number by 16, and it turns into a 1. I can divide this number by 16. It also turns into a 1. So now instead of doing 16 times 5, I'm only doing 1 times 5, and I get 5 as my answer. And then here I've got 3 times 1 as opposed to 3 times 16. And 3 times 1 is 3, and then we simplify. So 3 goes into 5 one time, and I'm left with 2/3 left over. So let's try one more. Okay, now this one's going to be the trickiest one of them all. Okay, so far we've done a fraction problem, we've done a mixed number problem, and now one of the last things that we've got to deal with is integers. Okay, we've got to deal with positives and negatives. Even though that 5 1/4 is not an actual integer, it can still be a negative number. Okay, now this is where we got to think about those integer rules though. Okay, and our rule in multiply and divide was I multiply or divide like normal, and then I come through and count my negatives. And in this case, I've got 1 negative, so that means my answer is going to be a negative. So now once I understand that, then I just work this problem just like normal. Okay, so this one, I got to make it a fraction. So 4 times 5 is 20, plus 1 is 21 over 4. And then this 5/8, it's already a fraction, so what do I need to do with it? I need to flip it. I need to multiply by its reciprocal. So I multiply, and then I take the reciprocal of 5/8, which is 8 over 5. All right. So now, is there any simplifying I can do here? Well, you'll notice there's an 8 and a 4. They both have a 4 in common. So I can divide this 4 by 4, and it turns into a 1. I can divide this 8 by 4, and it turns into a 2. So now when I multiply across, I've got 21 times 2, which will give me 42. and 1 times 5, which will give me 5. So now we have to simplify. Okay, so how many times does 5 go into 42? It'll go 8 times. So 8 times 5 is 40. We subtract 40 from 42. We're left with 2. And what size piece are they? 5s. Okay, so it's 8 2/5, but then we got to remember, okay, I had this one negative, so my answer is going to be negative 8 2/5. Okay, so one last time. In order to multiply or divide mixed numbers, we can use this little wrap to help us remember what to do. To divide fractions, don't ask why, just flip the second and multiply. To multiply fractions, you know you got them. It's top times top and bottom times bottom. Until next time.